This week on Mastering Dungeons, our main topic is going to look and peer into the mind of the Psion. Wizards of the Coast, in their Unearthed Arcana entry, has released a new version of the Psion, and that spurned us. Wording today is hard. It didn't.
This is all about the mind, Shawn. What's going on?
Right, exactly. Yeah. It spurred us.
Spurred, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's right. To look at the Psion and look at Psionics over the years. So we're going to take a look at the Psionic rules from the very beginning. We are going to talk about why Psionics is so hard to design or develop or introduce into a rule set. And then we're going to look specifically at the Psion playtest itself.
And this entire episode is going to be broadcast just to your mind. You can actually turn down the volume, whatever you're watching, listening to, unless we run out of energy dice, which could happen at any moment.
I'm already out of energy dice. I am a very bad Psion. So, the history of Psionics in D&D. It must be a relatively recent thing, right? They wouldn't have added this early, except they did. Added it very, very, very early. The original D&D game that was released in 1974 had a few expansions to it. The third expansion was called Eldritch Wizardry. Written by Gary Gygax and Brian Bloom, published by TSR in 1976 as a 60-page digest. So it was the third supplement to the original D&D rules. It included the Druid and Psionics, as well as some demon lords and
and I always love that because you say, oh, Psionics, it's not really D&D, and it's like it's as D&D as the Druid, right? It's a great way to think of it.
Exactly, and demons and devils. So I went back to the original pamphlet, and I thought, okay, let me just take a look. Let me see how these rules work. My psionic reserves were drained as I even tried to figure out where in the booklet this was. Because it was talking about the Druid, and then suddenly it's talking about Psionics with no break, no header. It was just boom. And then it went back to talking about the Druid again. And I'm trying to parse together, how does this actually work? And I gave up after about 15 minutes. I'm just like, I can't even begin to figure out how you would use this as a rule.
Well, how did you do when you looked at AD&D?
Well, the AD&D, I'm like, oh, I remember AD&D. I played that. I remember, I think I might have even had a Psionic character. So let me go back to that book. Appendix 1, the first appendix, is all about Psionics. I'm like, okay, cool. So, it talked about Psionics and Psionic abilities and Psionic combat. And then in about 15 minutes in, I went, at least it's its own section, so I can help. But I was still lost. I was still trying to figure out how this worked.
I have a little better recall for this because we had a number of characters that got lucky and ended up with Psionics. And the way it worked in this appendix is any of your characters, this was not a class, right? Any of your characters could have these psionic powers. So, that's the original concept of this, is it's not a class, it's not a choice. And of course, this is an era when the bard wasn't exactly, or it was a weird class where you take many classes to become, So it was a different world design-wise. And in this concept of AD&D, and I think OD&D is somewhat similar, you rolled to see if somehow you had this latent psionic talent. And if you did, which was, some 3% chance or something, and we would always roll in front of our DM. If you did, then you had to roll again to see, well, how psionic are you? Or maybe it was off of how high you hit on that initial percent. And, a lot of times what would happen was oh, you have some paltry defense, and maybe you can make light show up every now and then, right? The equivalent of a bad cantrip. And, but you might also roll, and you had this pool of psionic points and all these different attacks and defenses and special things that you could do that could be actually quite amazing.
Mhm.
And then, as we found out quite painfully, or my party
Yep.
found out, when I ran Queen of the Demon Web Pits,
Mhm.
every now and then there's a monster that has psionics.
Mhm.
Intellect Devourers, we also found bad news.
Yep.
They have this thing, and what they have psionics. And when you have attack modes as a monster,
Mhm.
and the party has attack and defense modes, you go into
Right.
psionic combat in the first
Right.
segment out of the 10 of the round of
Yep.
combat. And my favorite, we had a couple of brushes with this early on with some psionic monsters, but it was when they faced off against Lolth. I looked at her
Mhm.
stat block again. I'm like, oh, psionics.
Mhm.
So I'm like, everybody, wait, we got to do our psionic combat. What that looked like in real life was 1 second, they walk in and see Lolth, and then the whatever character was, rogue, paladin, whatever, just keels over
Yep.
dead.
Yep.
Because in that first segment, you then have like a mini round, and her attacks and the points she could spend into them was so much better than what that other character had with whatever they'd
Yeah.
rolled, that they just were immediately dead.
Yeah. We had a very similar situation happen. I wasn't DMing and I wasn't the Sanic character, but someone rolled it, they got it, and they thought it was great. And as soon as we came up against some psionic monsters, it was just like, why is Bob bleeding out his ears?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'm happy I'm not a psionic
Yeah.
character
Yep.
in that case, because it like Teo said, it was its own thing
Yeah.
that really didn't mesh with any of the other rules, except in the sense that there were spell-like things that could happen and you could die.
Mm-hmm.
So that was AD&D. In second edition, they created the complete Psionics handbook, which Teos is holding up, because of course Teos has a copy of it. And I did at some point before I sold everything when I needed to buy a house. Oh, and a nice picture of somebody's door opening into their brain.
This book has the best art, and I'm saying this
Yeah.
completely sarcastically, of any
Yeah.
source book ever, with this total like 70s,
Mhm.
hippie-ish mind art, new healing
Yeah.
type art. It's so funny.
Oh, that's funny. And it was not made in the 70s. It was made in 1991. Designed by Steve Winter, who is still out there designing games. Great designer.
Mhm.
Now we have a 128-page soft cover. So we've gone from just part of a 60-page pamphlet to an appendix in the player's handbook to this complete 128-page guide. I see that art and I see that blue header at the top of the chapter, and I'm like, that is so second edition AD&D.
The art that isn't the new
Right,
sciencey type
psychedelic.
art is
Yeah.
amazingly cool art. So there is great art in
Yep.
here for sure.
Yep. And so with this, we get the quote, psionics is not magic. But then they acknowledge that maybe D&D doesn't need another system on top of the one
We're
for
getting one
magic.
anyway.
Yep. And so what does psionics become here in second edition, Teos?
Yeah, I mean that's what's funny, right? They say like we probably shouldn't be doing this, but here you go. And because I think we got this giant book to fill. So what they did was create a complete class, right? And here, this class has 6 disciplines it can choose from, 4 of which we will find are in the 5th edition version that we're going to review. The ones that didn't make the cut are clairsentience and metapsionics. And metapsionics was sort of the advanced one to tweak your other powers. So that makes sense. And clairsentience, we'll see they've rolled in some of those features. And then the other thing that you had was a wild talent system. So anyone can have psionics, which, was kind of the equivalent version of what AD&D tried to do, right? You might have one power, but in this case, it wasn't about the attacking whatevering. It was about getting one of the powers that was associated with one of the disciplines that could do something neat, like, your hand can turn into a dagger, or you can camouflage your body. Things like that were kind of cool. And what was awesome about AD&D, we have to all remember that AD&D, or second edition AD&D, was a plethora of rules you could choose from, right? And one of the reasons people moved on to third edition, designers moved on to third edition, was that there was just so much to choose from. The game you always had some things that were broken or didn't fit or didn't work. So this was not worse than anything else out there, and I think generally worked fairly well. Um,
Mhm.
it really created its own system where the psionic class got special powers, right? These were not spells. Psionics was not magic. You got your own powers. Each power had special features. You were different than anyone else. So when you played a scion, you felt really cool, right? You were doing your own thing. But of course, you had to have this whole book. And there were power issues and balance issues, but it was super neat. And similarly, being a wild talent, you had this neat, I turn my hands into claws or I fire off a mind bullet or whatever. They also had a combat system where they used the iconic powers that like Tower of Iron Will, Intellect, Defense, Mind Whip, Eagle Whip, all those.
Id insinuation.
Id insinuation, yeah. And so
all the best Freudian terms.
Yeah. So you had these as sort of attacks and defenses that you could use in this system. And this book made it, I think, really into the big leagues when the Dark Sun setting came out. When the Dark Sun campaign emerged, it was a world where arcane magic had destroyed the world. Arcane magic was illegal because it was controlled by the different sorcerer kings and queens in these various city-states. So psionics could actually shine. And every Dark Sun character had a wild talent. Which was cool, right? So you just bake that into the system, the psionic abilities, and then the psionics flourished. And as part of that, they added another expansion, which I'll hold up, of course, have to justify my purchases, The Will and the Way. And in The Will and the Way, what they did that was really super sweet is reflect the novels that Troy Denning and others had written, where battles weren't just, I choose this power, that power. It was a mindscape. And you entered into the mindscape of the person you were attacking and saw how their world was. And so one person might be like a hell, another a posh villa or whatever. And you were now like adventuring in their mind as you did your attacks and defenses, which was very cool. They tried to kind of replicate that. Didn't quite work, but really evocative. And Dark Sun just leaned into this with lots of people playing through these rules.
Yep. So, Dark Sun again embraced it, but then we have a new edition. We have third edition. And so in 2001, a few years after third edition came out, we get the Psionics Handbook designed by Bruce Cordell. And now we go from the 100 and what I forgot, 20 pages to 160 pages. And now it's a hardcover. And with third edition, you had more of a bringing of the rules into order. Whereas first edition and second edition were chaos, third edition tried to bring everything into shape, into line, to make it easier to understand, easier to play, and easier to design for. So what was the general thought about the Psionics in third edition, Teos?
I did not use it much. I think because most of my play was through Living Greyhawk, and it did not allow this book. So you didn't see a lot of that going on. But hearing from friends, it was kind of a thing that was held to be quite broken, not balanced. But fun and creative just didn't kind of work. You had issues with it as a home DM to work with it. And I don't think it was particularly popular. I think in fact, this is the era that I sort of think of as where people sort of gamers turned against psionics a bit and saw it as being not fitting into their game. That's how I feel. I don't know if that's factually true.
Yeah, I played with just a few like psionic characters, and it was sort of, as you said, it fit into the rules better than the previous editions did, but it was still one more thing, one more lever to either break or manipulate the rules in a way that the original game had not been designed to take.
And it still was very much the approach of being its own system, right? Like having its
Yeah.
own powers and spending points to fuel them. So it was not trying to do what we'll see in 4th edition.
Right. And in 4th edition, the player's handbook 3 had a psionic focused bent with psionic classes and also psionic species. So in 2010, we saw things like the mind shard,
Mm-hmm.
the species, right?
Yeah.
Is that what
I think is it
it
the
was the
shard
mind
mind?
shard? What was
Shard mind.
shard mind? Yeah, the
Yeah.
shard mind. So
And
it's like crystalline structure
yeah.
that had its own set of psionic abilities, inherent in its species.
It got a lot of attention because the shard mine took male and female forms so that the female shard mine had breasts, and the designers explained this as because they are fascinated by humanoids. And you're like, oh, give me a break. But yeah, it was interesting, right? I think the reason was 4th edition really got into this concept of power source, which 5th edition 2024 toyed in during playtesting, and it didn't go very well, so they left it. So you had books that were like martial power, arcane power, right? And so psionics,
power, yeah.
you primal, and so you ended up with psionics being one of the power types. And the funny part artistically was everybody had a little halo around their like head of like this psionic, some kind of neon color around your brain, which I very much dislike art wise. But what was nice is 4th edition, everything was a common power structure. And that was sweet because then you weren't dealing with a completely different system, but you could really dig into the flavor of it. And that's what you saw with like the Psion, the battle mind. I loved my battle mind. Oh, I thought that was such a fun defender class. And so you had different classes that were all playing off of this psionic power type and expressing that in a interesting, evocative way, but it's all the common power card type structure.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so that brings us to the 2020 or 2014 5th edition D&D rules, and why maybe we didn't see psionics except as a bit of flavor to explain some of the powers or spells, because psionics is a challenge. And Teos has said a few words that I want to focus on here, which is like flavor and mechanics and fun. And psionics comes from the background of science fiction and fantasy. It's this idea that there's this power source from within yourself, your own mind, that you are able to focus in a similar way to magic, but not the same as magic. So things like Doctor Strange, things like the Force in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Which is magic, but it's not. It's and this is the history of this phenomena that D&D tried to bring into the game. Obviously, it was a popular genre trope because it was brought into the game so quickly. The problem is, what do you do with it to differentiate it from magic without breaking the whole game? Or how do you make a brand new system that people are going to want to play without unbalancing the game that you've already created?
And I'll offer,
yeah,
as comparison, that even like the sorcerer and the wizard once had sort of these firm, like when the sorcerer was created, like if we look at the versions in 3rd edition, right, there were these hard rules of what's put in there so it's not too strong to where the wizard goes, wait a minute, what? Why are they doing that? I'm supposed to be the cool caster. Why did this new kid get all these cool powers? And over time, you can argue that some of that wall has come down, making it harder and harder for wizards to sort of validate now in the 2024 era, other than by having some very powerful spells. Wizards and other classes can be stronger casters or more flexible casters. And a lot of those things wizards got like far fewer spells, right? Those things aren't quite true the way they once were in 3rd edition. So it's
Yeah.
hard to create a system that truly can be fun, stand that test of
Mhm.
time balance wise, right? That's tough. It's a tough challenge.
Right. And so that's why we've seen over the years casters use the Vancian system,
Mm-hmm.
and then psionic characters would use PowerPoints.
Mm-hmm.
And so to use a different system, but still accomplish the same things, right?
Yeah.
You are still doing 1d10 damage with this spell, but instead of using a third level slot to do it, you are using 3 PowerPoints to do
Right.
it.
Yeah. And even
And yeah,
AD&D said that a spell that you cast is a spell, even though you did it with your mind, right? So even 2E
right,
says psionics are not magic, but if a psionic effect creates magic, you can dispel it. You can treat it like any other spell because you conjured that spell with your mind.
right. So if we go to my 3 F's scale of fun, flavorful, and effing balanced, uh, psionics are so hard to place in that scale because what's fun for one person is I want to use a completely different system.
Mhm.
What's fun for another is I want this to fit into the system I already know.
Yeah.
Flavor is hard because your version of what psionics is might be Star Wars and the Force, whereas someone else's system is creating telekinetic or
Telepathic.
telepathic
Mm-hmm.
power structures and damage, and this sort of separate, as it was in first edition, a separate thing that goes on between psionic type characters that doesn't really affect, or doesn't affect in the same way, people who don't have psionic powers
Yeah.
or psionic talents. And
Yeah.
then, of course, the freaking balanced is all over the charts, right? How do these different systems come together? If it's all just roll a die, do damage, and impose an effect, then why bother having psionics at all?
Mhm.
If it's just going to be the same thing over and over,
Right.
does the flavor that it brings do enough for your game to bring it in if it's just going to be the same thing that a wizard can do?
Right. And some of that depends on what the core system is architected as, because I think in fourth edition, adding a whole new power source was a feature, not a
Mhm.
problem. And
Yeah.
having a psionic defender and a psionic, DPS and so on, striker, like that all worked because we already had a lot of options, and it wasn't about and more options was a feature generally.
Right.
There were some issues
Yeah.
publishing wise, but it was generally a feature. I think fifth edition has struggled to sort of say, we don't want to do too many classes. You get
Mhm.
the artificer, yeah, we're going to stop now, right?
Mhm.
And a
Yeah.
class has to be really solid, really iconic, really necessary for them to want to add it. But they have no problem just drowning us in subclasses, apparently.
Mhm. Right.
And so that's where we've seen, what has the sign been so far in 2014, and even especially in 2024, is a plethora of psionic themed subclasses with the soul knife and all these others that are really bringing that psionic kind of concept, including even these energy dice
Mhm.
into that system. And a lot of monsters that they show as psionic and try to underscore that. I'm not entirely
Mhm.
sure why. I've always wondered if there's like a grand plan someone tried to weave around psionics with an idea of
Mhm.
some big abyssal campaign or something, but it never shows up. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't quite understand why there is so much psionics so far in 2024 without an actual psionicist until maybe now.
Maybe now. But
Maybe.
let's look at 2020 or 5e.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2014, we got a playtest version called the Mystic, right? Which
Yeah.
had a couple of variations. Never saw the light of day beyond the playtest,
Yeah.
unless I'm forgetting
No, it's
something.
it's a shame. I mean, Mike Mearls, I think, that was the lead developer. The first one was in July
Yeah.
2015. Then Take Two was in 2016, and it never got rated well. I liked it. I played one in a like an Extra Life game once. I thought it was pretty fun, but it did not get it did not see a lot of acclaim. It described magic and psionics as distinct forces. It again said, but if you create a spell, then it's magic. It had psi points, which increased every level, and you spent points on your psionic disciplines to get its benefits. And there are usually several benefits, like there'd be a residual background one because you've got this kind of thing on, and then you could use the various, three or so benefits whenever you needed to. And then you also learned talents, complicating things, which were similar but didn't cost points. And you learned a few of those over time. And I think it just didn't resonate with players. I think also, honestly, one of the things that happens is people keep rating Psionics low just because it's Psionics. In the same way that some folks don't want a laser gun in their D&D game, right? I think it just, some people just say, Psionics, nope, I'm out. And we've seen that in our Discord and discussions. So one of the things I've always think is tough is how do you get feedback on your Psionic class when some percentage just says no to anything?
Right. And that's sort of why we did the history of it, to show that for the people that have been playing since the first books dropped, Psionics is a really divisive thing. A, the mechanics are divisive. B, the power structure is divisive. C, just the trope itself can be divisive. And so, as Teos said, it's hard to get a gauge for what people might want when there is a percentage who are just hitting the nope button as soon as they see the P word in their D&D rules.
Yeah. The P word being psi or psionic.
Yes. Is there any other P word? I don't know.
Never has been.
Anyway, the reason we're here now is because the Unearthed Arcana most recently dropped to give us this new version of a psionic class called the Psion. What do these do? They weave magic and extraordinary powers through the power of their minds. They develop their minds as fonts of power. That's a lot of power and mind in 2 sentences. That manifest spells and grow stronger over the course of their adventuring careers. And Teos brought this up already, but I'm going to restate it. My very first question when I say new class, and this is any class of any kind, is could this be a subclass instead? Are there going to be some groovy new mechanics that make playing this so much different that it needs this other class, that we need to go through the process of balancing and play testing and doing all of this to get this specific trope into the game in a specific way? Is the class there, though, because of flavor reasons as opposed to mechanical reasons? Teos mentioned that Dark Sun really embraced psionics as an alternative to this magic stigma that was reinforced through the lore. So if you're going to release Dark Sun, you sort of need psionics if you're going to keep that lore consistent. So does that need for the flavor outweigh everything else that goes into this? And so that's how, when I first look at a class, that's the lens through which I particularly look at it.
And even, could I can already play, say, a sorcerer and say, oh, I only cast sort of like charm and illusion spells, and I'm going to call myself a scion. So let's take that example. And now this new class, is that really different? Am I really, oh, no, that's a scion, right? These are 2 totally different things. You're the little reflavoring thing is nothing like this, whatever it is. And ideally, that it's also creating new play engagement, right? Which is hard to do because, of course, your rogue creates different interactions than your fighter and your wizard than your cleric. So can we establish that it's different enough from other classes that you go, yeah, it does this, and that's worth it. That elevates gameplay, that creates new patterns of play. It's kind of neat. Hard to do.
Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to get to the base class abilities And then in a future episode, we will look at the subclasses, the new spells, and things like that for the Psion. So let's look at the core Psion traits. What's its primary ability? Is it going to be charisma, the force of power that you can draw? Is it going to be wisdom, this innate sense that you bring and the power of your psyche? Nope, it's going to be intelligence, just like the wizard. Okay. So far, intelligence-based primary ability. Hit point die, D6 per Psion level, just like the wizard. Saving throw proficiencies. Is it going to be, well, it's going to be intelligence because we already had no primary. So what's behind that? Is it going to be, again, is it going to be charisma? Is it going to be constitution? Is it going to be something like that reserve that you can draw upon? No, it's going to be wisdom. Okay.
I would have liked constitution here.
Yeah,
because
I would have too.
With the other things we're going to see about the class, I think that would have worked better and would have differentiated a bit more.
Yep. So, all right. So far, it's a class. Skill proficiencies, choose 2 from Arcana, Insight, Intimidation, Investigation, Medicine, Perception, or Persuasion. Yeah, it's a list of skills. Fine. Weapon proficiencies, simple weapons. Okay. Armor training, nope. Not as a base class. And then your starting equipment is either the 50 gold piece standard or a spear, 2 daggers, a light crossbow, 20 bolts, a case, a dungeoneer's pack, and 6 gold pieces. So pretty standard fare for a magic wielding class. Any thoughts so far?
No, I mean, it's fine. It's fine for design to sort of mimic something else and say, this is largely a wizard with a couple minor, skill changes, some gear changes. That's fine. It's what comes next.
Yep. So at level 1, the first thing you get is spellcasting. 2 Psion cantrips of your choice. Minor illusion and telekinetic fling are recommended.
Yeah, and telekinetic fling is new.
Yes, you prepare those spells from those available to you. You can prepare up to 4 at first level, and then you can cast from your spell slots. Whenever you gain a Psion level, you can replace 1 spell from your prepared list with another Psion spell of an eligible level. So you choose your 4, and that's what you know until the next level.
Yeah, and the spellcasting, the number of spell slots is the same as like the wizard, the cleric, the sorcerer, kind of your main caster classes. It's all the same. They all now have the same number of spell slots per level. And so in that case, kind of no big difference there. It's just that you have sort of the sorcerer approach where you pick up spells up front, not every day.
Intelligence, obviously, is your spellcasting ability. One change. When you cast a Psion spell, it does not require a verbal or material component, even if the V and the M are listed in its components entry, except for material components that are consumed by the spell or have a cost specified in the spell.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool. It works well for the Dark Sun world where you kind of have to hide your spell casting or things you might be doing. So if you had to do hand gestures or crush a whatever, chunk of dirt, no, but you don't have to do that anymore because it's coming out of your brain. This is also useful for things like being in a silent spell. Otherwise, kind of limited, but just fun. It's coming out of your mind is what we're seeing feel-wise.
Here's a question, everyone out there in listener land. If you're a game master or a player, when you're playing and you're looking at your character sheet and you're doing something and you say, I cast Burning Hands, I cast, Dimension Door, how many times do you look at whether there's a verbal, material, or somatic component? Do you only do so when you may try to be quiet? Do you even look at it then? Or is it just assumed that you're casting your spell? I am guessing that for the most part, even when you're in situations where you may I'm trying to be silent, it may sort of get hand waved. Yeah. I don't know that this, by rules, it should be quite important. I'm wondering if it actually will end up being during play.
Yeah, it would have to either be a setting emphasis, like it was in like we hand waved a lot of component stuff in AD&D, but when we played Darkson, then it was a big deal, right? So either the setting has to impose it, or it's that situation like being in a silence situation. But that doesn't come up often. So mainly flavor, I'd say.
Sure. All right. So far we've got a basic spellcaster using spell slots and cantrips and so on. At level 1, you also get psionic power. You harbor a wellspring of psionic energy within yourself. This is represented by your psionic energy dice. You get 4 6-siders at level 1, 6 8-siders at level 5, 8 8-siders at level 9, 8 10-siders at level 11, 10 10-sided dice at level 13, and 12 12-sided dice at level 17.
And that the dice and the progression match the other Psionic classes that use dice, energy dice, the Psi Warrior, the Soul Knife, like number of dice, 2 times proficiency bonus, that kind of approach. So they took that and lifted it and move it over here, which is fine.
Yep. So your psionic energy dice enhance or feel certain psionic features. You start with 2 such features: telekinetic propel and telepathic connection. And then there are other powers that may expend psionic energy dice. And you can't use a power if it requires you to, if you have expended all of your dice. You do regain 1 expended die after you finish a short rest, and you regain all of them when you finish a long rest.
And that's a bit of a change. The other Psionic subclasses we mentioned, they only regain on a long rest, so it's an advantage of being the Psion.
Okay. So what are these 2 little features that you have? Telekinetic propel. As a bonus action, you can choose 1 large or smaller creature other than you that you can see within 30 feet of yourself, and then you can roll 1 psionic energy die. The target must succeed on a strength saving throw or be pushed or pulled, your choice, up to a number of feet straight away from yourself, I assume, or straight toward you if you pull, equal to 5 times the number rolled. The die is expended only if the target fails the saving throw. All right, so as a bonus action, push or pull, 5 makes sense because if we're using a grid, 5 feet is 5 feet. And then we're going to roll that die and see how far you get pushed.
Yeah, so 5 to 30 feet away.
Yeah. With a 6-sided die. When you get that 12-sided die, it's 5 to 60 feet away. Yeah. What do you think?
So design-wise, you've got a spellcaster where what you're going to do is theme the spells that you cast, and presumably our spell list will be easily themed. Fine. Now we get 2 features, and this is where, separate from a subclass, you are nailing the concept of being a Psion. So telekinesis can be, but am I going to use this a lot? Well, I only have but so many dice, so I probably will use this only when I think it's important. And the problem is this variable push. I don't know whether I can get them into the pit unless the pit's 5 feet behind them, right? And I don't know how effective it is, and they might not save. Well, I do get to keep my die. In that case, that's okay. But I find it to be so. Like, to me, this is not great utility. It's not a thing I will do all the time. I would have much rather this be combined with something like, and I also have the Jedi mind trick of, to be a pull thing towards me, right? To grab an object or somehow extend it to be more useful or more likely to use it, and that I would exert my psionic self upon the game more often. To me, this is a little limited. What do you think?
Yeah. I am of 2 minds. The first thing is force movement is such a wild card in D&D. 5th edition 2014, 5th edition 2024, whatever. Because it leads to all the questions of, I push this person, this creature, into the wall. Does it do damage? How much damage? I push this creature into another creature. Does it do damage? How much damage? I push this creature off the cliff or into the pit. Do they get another saving throw?
Yeah.
Should I be able to push this CR20 creature who happens to not be able to fly? Oh, it's intelligence based creature, so there's not a big strength. Its bonus is only +4. Uh, and is that the end? Right?
Yeah.
It's such. However, with 2024's switch to more tactical play, I could see this possibly being something that people would love if it's a super tactical. I need to move this creature into the range of my barbarian, or I need to push this creature into the area of effect of the spell that's about to go off. But even then, pushing or pulling is different than moving. So now if I want to push, I need to move over here to stand directly here.
True.
So I push directly away into the line of the barbarian's rage, into the line of
weapon mastery.
the fighters. Right, weapon mastery stuff. It's super fun and super tactical for people that want super tactical fun.
Yeah.
For people that don't, it's meh at best.
Yeah, I wanted to do a little more and be a little more fun. Like this feels a little bit like those episodes of Clone Wars where like Ahsoka and Anakin fling each other around. They did in Rebels too. But then the next episode, it's like they can't do it anymore. I guess that's when you roll low. But I think it's a neat idea, right? Like I would love to see more situations. I think I want it to be more reliable. So you could do something like say, I'm going to ready as a Psion my bonus action, right? Using using up my action to where you, when you jump, at the end of your jump, I will propel you the rest of the way, right? Because I know you're going to make it. Instead of rolling and I don't even know if you're going to make it, that would be really fun, right? To use this on allies. I actually wish you could use it on yourself, right? Push yourself off of the ground to get up to a ledge. But that removes that, and actually then it has to be move, not push or pull. And so I think I actually want it to be stronger to move rather than push or pull. It's already got a saving throw, right? Which as an ally you could choose to fail in 2024. So I kind of want this to be more fun more often.
Yeah, I agree. And this is a perfect example of why these things need to be put into the base game as opposed to added on later. Because then you could make the Psion do things that no one else could do. Right,
well,
levitate.
You still can, right? I mean, they just
right. But it's harder. It's harder.
Sure. It runs into the previous.
Right. It runs into the, like you said, being able to move someone up would be great. Get rid of the levitate spell. Have that be something that Psions do. Get rid of like telekinesis as a spell. That's something that Psions do. So if you want to be able to do that, you have to be this. And it gives them their niche. It gives them their shtick. It gives them the thing that they can do that no one else can.
I honestly think,
and this comes close.
Yeah,
but it doesn't quite get there.
If you just made this 10 feet, so you make it reliable. It's 10 feet, but you can use it on yourself, and it's a move. I think that would be super fun. And maybe if you're really worried about this being abused, then remove it from being on creatures or on enemies. Just use it on allies. Like that would be really fun to constantly. Because then what you do is you don't worry about moving the enemy to the barbarian. You move the barbarian. Right.
Yeah. Well,
and including up the ledge and whatever. And
it does say creature, so you could do it. You could do it on allies.
Yeah, you can do it.
And that's a cool thing. But still, like you say, if you're rolling that die, if you love chaos, that's great. If you love the fact that I need to move you 15 feet, let's see if I can do it. And we're going to have to. The whole combat could change if I roll a 2 or less. But I would play the hell out of that game, but every character needs to be that then. Not like just this character.
3rd edition, I would often play a monk. that could just jump absurd things. And it sounds broken, but when you take a class that isn't really super powerful in the traditional sense, right? Like they're not the fighter, the paladin, whatever, and you allow them to just be anywhere on the battlefield, it's actually really fun for everybody. It's not generally game breaking because, okay, you jumped up there and you can fight things, but also they can all get you there and no one else can get to you, right? So usually it works fine and it's actually really fun for everybody. And I think I've said my piece here.
Yep. Okay. So we've got telekinetic propel. Telepathic connection. You have telepathy with a range of 5 feet. As a bonus action, you can expend 1 psionic energy die and roll it for a number of minutes equal to your psion level. The range of your telepathy increases by a number of feet equal to 10 times the number rolled. So between 10 and 60 feet, your telepathy extends. And again, lots and lots and lots of questions here. Teos, do you want to ask some of the questions that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious question is, why have you made this so limited when so many species, classes, you name it, get a lot more flexibility, right? I mean, you designed the Acquisitions Incorporated Verdun, and the Verdun has the ability to do telekinesis or telepathy with any creature it can see within 30 feet. Don't need to share a language to understand, but just has to be able to speak one language. And it's slow, so you communicate slowly, but that is so much better than this. And I mean, 5 feet? Like, what hey, man, touch my forehead. And then rolling dice to see whether I can get to the person I'm going to talk to. No, thank you. The soul knife. Yeah. The soul knife has its psychic whispers power. And that one is an action, but you can choose one or more creatures you can see. You roll your die, but that's the number of hours that you can speak telepathically with these creatures. And the range is within a mile. So it's like Rary's telepathic bond. Mm-hmm. You're a scion. Like, this shouldn't be so limited. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah. All right, so we'll jump directly into the other things that you get. So level 1, you also get subtle telekinesis, which is basically the mage hand cantrip, but you can cast it without somatic components, and it's invisible if you wish to make it so. Okay, you can move things around. Cool, good. Yep. Level 2, psionic discipline. You learn further psionic techniques that are fueled by your psionic energy dice. You can take 2 more disciplines of your choice, such as expanded awareness and id insinuation, and they're described lower down, and we're going to get to those next time. Psionic level 2, psionic modes. So you have honed your psionic powers to use as both a shield and a weapon. As a bonus action, you can choose one of the following modes, granting you benefits for 1 minute or until you use this feature again. You can use the feature twice, and then you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. So this goes back all the way back to these attack and defense modes. And I could see the designers saying, let's give a nod to that back there.
Where can we use that?
I like when you use those things as inspiration, but not as a yoke to weigh you down. So let's see how this works. Attack mode. Damage from your weapon attacks, psion spells, or psionic features. Ignore resistance to psychic damage. In addition, when you roll damage for a spell, you can expend 1 die, psionic energy die, to re-roll a number of damage dice up to your intelligence modifier, and you must use these new rolls. So in other words, you roll a fireball, and you can spend a die to reroll a number of those damaged dice.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's fine. I mean, you're going to do a lot of psychic damage. So ignoring the resistance right there is pretty good. It means that if you're, in an aberrant campaign or something, you're not going to be suddenly like, oh, great, what am I supposed to do? So that alone is pretty important. The reroll is a minor benefit that you might choose to use if you have lots of energy dice around. you're generally only going to roll when you feel pretty good. You'll do better, and we'll probably all have a laugh if you don't. So I think it's reasonable. It's not,
Mhm.
the poetry that and creativity that came out of like AD&D's. Certainly not The Will and the Way or anything like that. It's not super flavorful, but it's fitting.
Mhm. And then you have the defense mode of you have resistance to psychic damage. And if you fail an intelligence, wisdom, or charisma saving throw, you can use your reaction to expend one of your psionic energy dice to roll that and add that number to the saving throw, potentially turning a failure into a success. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty good just for that saving throw. It'll capture, probably more than half of your saves with those three abilities. Um, And so, if you want to be in that area, there are probably a lot of saving throws coming up. So this will make it easier to, that's a big deal if you can avoid one of those types of rolls. Usually those types of rolls come with big penalties, right? Conditions or not being able to do stuff. So that's pretty useful.
Mm-hmm. Level 3 and 4 are typical at a subclass, and then level 4 get a feat or your ability score improvement. Level 5, when you finish a short rest, you can regain expended psionic energy dice, but no more than a number equal to half your number of dice. So, in other words, you're getting 3 back instead of just 1 at the end of a short rest once you hit level 5. And then, as you get more, you get half of your total back.
Yeah, and if I can pause here, one of the things I like to do is think, at this level, right? We've reached level 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
Do we feel like a Psion? Because for a lot of campaigns, we're not getting further than this, right? Even if we start at level 3, we might not get further than this. And so, you've got you'll have something from your subclass, so we, that will be added in. But you're essentially the hard baked things here, that attack mode or defense mode, which you will choose to have one. Like actually, you can only use that twice. So you will periodically put one of those up. You've got your disciplines that we'll talk about later. You've got the subtle telekinesis, and then you have those two features, the telekinetic propel and telepathic connection, on top of all these spells. So, yeah, I would say that I think you, at, say, level 5th, can act like a Psion. You have some differences from your other spellcasting classes that probably, we have to look at some of the other pieces there, but probably distinguish you at the table. Do I personally like it more than, say, what AD&D tried to do? Maybe not. What 2E did. I loved that was its own meaty thing. I love that as a player, game master, designer, all of that. But I think this is all pretty reasonable. I don't know how you feel, Shawn, at this sort of level 5, 6 snapshot.
I'm at the point where I could go either way. A lot of it will depend on if there are new spells. A lot of it will depend on if there are feats that we can play around with.
And these disciplines.
Well, so far, what we haven't seen is as an action. Right? We've seen as a bonus action. We've seen as a bonus action. We've seen as a reaction. We haven't seen as an action yet.
Maybe because that's all spells.
That may be in the. So we'll see if there are new spells that have a Psion feel other than doing psychic damage.
So maybe
just a couple more.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, maybe we continue with these class features.
So the main class features, there's only 3 more. There is level 7's Psionic Surge. When you roll initiative, you can expend one of your hit point dice and regain 1 expended use of your psionic modes. So you can go attack or defense again if you expend one of your hit point dice, not one of your psionic dice.
Hit point dice,
yeah. In addition, after you roll 1 or more of your psionic energy dice, you can expend one of your hit point dice to treat any roll of 1, 2, or 3 as a 4 instead. All right. So what this is that overcharge, or right. This is you're digging down now and expending your physical energy to expend. And I like this. It fixes the problem that we were talking about earlier of, I want to move the barbarian 20 feet closer. Oh boy, I hope I don't roll a 1, 2, or 3. Well, now I use a hit point die and I can make sure that it's a 4. It
Yep.
gives that stability, which I like.
Yeah.
Level 9. Now we jump from level 7 to
Well,
level
I'll add
19.
there before you move on. Yeah, I like that
Okay.
too. It's a little weird, like all of a sudden hit point dice, right? At level 7
Right.
is a little weird. I wish there had been something at level 3 or something or 2 that reflected that. Because it is
Yeah.
cool. It is very movie-ish. A lot of the old movies, the fire starter type things, your nose bleeds or whatever, because you're pushing
Right.
so hard. Or even if you just say exhausted, right, where you're tired from spending your life energy. We see that in Jedi stuff and all that. But it is a neat concept that you can lean into while being mechanically stabilizing. So yeah, I like it too.
Mm-hmm. And so that was level 7. At level 19, you get an epic boon like everybody else. In this case, the boon of energy resistance is recommended. And then at level 20, you get Enkindled Life Force. Once per turn, when you expend 1 psionic energy die and roll it for use of a psion feature or psionic discipline, you can expend 2 of your hit point dice to roll 2 additional psionic energy dice and add the numbers rolled to the total. So you can really dig in and push someone.
Right. So you would roll 1 die, but you now roll 3,
Right.
and you can do
And
that
add them all
once
together.
per turn. So you can do it a lot if you have a lot of dice saved up for the big fight or the whatever. That is kind of cool. Yeah, that is pretty neat. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so the question that always comes to me when people start using hit point dice to do other things is, what's the rest? How are you resting? Are you having 12 encounters
Mm-hmm.
with several short rests along the way? Or are you just doing the 3 encounters and then you get a long rest? 3 encounters, you get a long rest. Because spending hit point dice is no big deal if you're the latter.
Right.
If you're the former and you are forced to use hit point dice to heal during these long and grueling adventures, that becomes hugely important.
Yeah.
And it will always go back to that for me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Which means it's
All right.
very erratic, right? In some campaigns, this is no cost at all. It's merely thematic. I missed that on level 20. That is hit point dice are spending. So you spend a sonic energy die, you then spend a hit point die to roll 2 extra. If you have plenty of hit point dice, you just do that whenever you can. Why not? Mm-hmm.
Yep, precisely. So next time we will look at the specific psionic disciplines you can choose. We will look at the new spells that the Psion will have access to, and feats as well. And then the subclasses, of course, to get the full look at this new Psion playtest.
And
Anything to add before we head off?
Yeah, I think if you're into betting, which is a terrible idea, but if you are, you can now place your bets on the default color of the halos that'll be around every character's heads in the new art. And I really hope the answer is transparent.
There you go. Well, Teos, yours is obviously a golden hue, whereas mine is a deep and ugly purple. But who also have golden hues are our listeners. We thank you for having the patience and the energy and the stamina and the willpower to continue to listen to us week after week. And also thank you for those who not only put up with us, but they give us a little extra. We really do appreciate that. So our Master of Dungeon supporters, thank you so much. Master of Realm supporters, you are in our hearts and in our show notes. And Masters of the Multiverse, well, you know what happens. I read and mangle your name with all my psionic fury. Agile Monk of the Fantasy Companion Workshops. Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Louis Enders of Lazy Wolf Studios. Craig Bailey, Dave Bastianson, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Calvin Bridges of Alos, Broba Ballin, Kevin Criswell, Dead Inertia DM, Evil John, Evan at Nimbleco, Will Doyle, Andy Edmonds at Neurodronomicon.com, James Fisher, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, William Harshman of Runeforged Tabletop Gaming, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst, Hyperlexic, the John T. Mantis TTRPG podcast, Teos is Stunned, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, The Mighty Jerd, JL at Tileforge, JR of the Twilight Perspective, Brian King, Jim Klingler, Chad Lynch, Paul Mata, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Trey McLemore, John Mickey, Mighty Zeus, Shawn, Molly, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson of the Deck of Player Safety, DT Norris of DT and Dragons, Phil Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, Philip and Lindsay, Frog Prince at Tentacles Squelching Wetly, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Ricardo Who Might Adventure, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Prunner from Croatia, Pugnus, Ozymandias Rex, Runner Rick, Chance Russo at Drago Russo. Teos's halo is now turning multicolors. Andy Shockney, Krishna Samosa, Tim Smith, Spark from Dunner Games, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Jeremy Taluman from the D&D and TV podcast, Trace, Joe Tyler, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, James Walton, Graham Ward, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Javier Waziak, Waterford Wizard, Chris Webster, Zach Types, and Z. Walt Winfrey. Thank you so much. Again, you can go to patreon.com/masteringdnd to drill yourself into our brains. You can also drill yourself into other people's brains by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the podcast. Those stars do help. You can also subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/masteringdungeons. You can see Teos's strained look as he tries to psionically do something I don't even want to know, but he will tell us now what he psionically does on his social media feeds and where you can find that.
Oh yeah, that's true. I do some things. You can find my 5-room learn to play technique that I shared last week on my latest video, where I talked about how you can just take any 5-room dungeon and make it a learn to play. And this week I'm going to release a video that shows how to use that technique for Deadlands. So I'm going to teach you as if you were a brand new player. We'll go through 5 rooms together, and at the end of it, you'll know the basics of Deadlands. That's my goal.
Beauty. I am not going to do anything so spectacular, but you can still follow me on all the social medias at Shawn, SHAWN, Merwin, MERWIN.
Mm-hmm.
We're on Mastodon. We're on Blue Sky. We are on YouTube. We are hosting all of our patrons on our Discord. So thank you so much for listening. Teos, we have strained our brains looking at the Psion. Yeah. What are we going to do now?
I'm going to use the power of my mind to compel everybody to go play Tenacious D's Wonder Boy video, which is actually really all you need to know about Psionics.
Mm-hmm. I am going to go rinse off my halo because it is filthy.